and since many years ago, these movies that have appeared at Christmas become part of our stable. How many of you have an opportunity to ever watch something called the Hallmark Channel? You been there for that? Yeah, I know how it goes. My wife first introduced me to Hallmark Channel, and I tell you, I'm at that point where all of a sudden I think I know the Hallmark Channel movies even before they start up, but I've crossed the bridge. I'm at a point now where even though I know what the plot is and I've seen it about 10 times, I just like to see it one more time. And that's the way those favorite movies are for us in the world. You know some of those, It's a Wonderful Life. Do you remember how that's all? I mean, it's not Christmas unless you have that, you know. And all that. One of the movies is called The Miracle on 34th Street. And if you've had a chance to see it or see it again at any particular point, it's a wonderful movie. It came out in 1947, was put together just after World War II. The world found itself in a bit of a change, a transition. The war had just finished. A new sense of vitality came in the world. And people decided they wanted to jettison the old and begin to take off the new. Now, if you're farmers, what you'll know is that after World War II, farming made a tremendous transition. Before World War II, farming was kind of like it was in the old times. And then after that, suddenly everything began to bloom and blossom in a new way. John Deere, who made these simple machines, suddenly made machines that moved around and did more than just one row. They did 2 rows and then a little bit more than that. Before you know it, the whole world was caught up in this transition and this change. It was a new day and a new era. And it was in the moment of that people suddenly began to say to themselves, you know, I don't know if I just believe like my parents believe. That's kind of old-fashioned. I think I'm going to move into a new day, a new world, think in a new way. It's kind of the same thing I said when I graduated high school in the 70s, and I thought to myself, you know what? My parents are old-fashioned. I need to get a new word, a new thought, a new idea. I need to move on in life. Show them how foolish some of their ideas might be. It's in that context in 1947 when this movie came out and won 5 Academy Awards, the best movie of the year of all things. And yet, when it changed people's lives back then, it continues to change today because it reminds us of something called faith and something called believe. Do you remember a few years ago that wonderful Polar Express movie came out? I mean, it was so popular. People kept coming to it over and over again. You remember? And the basic premise of it all was not just the Santa Claus character or figure, not just the North Pole. It was that golden ticket they had. And you remember when they kept punching it? You remember what the golden ticket said? It said what? Believe. The word was there. Believe. It's always kind of been part of our world, but sometimes it gets all mixed up and lost in a world that sometimes finds itself in that kind of confusion. If you've noticed something called Black Friday, and if you had the opportunity to see some of the YouTube or some of the videos about people buying things, did you see some of that stuff? People were waiting at the doors, giant crowds. When they open up the door, what do people do? Oh, let's just go in and see if we can find something. That's why the police are there. That's why the little take-home paddy wagons are there, because they understand and know that people change. And given the opportunity of an open door and a limited supply, and do you remember when it was that they opened up at like 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday, the day after, and then it got to be a little bit different, and then it got to be midnight, and then it got to be 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, then 12. And then it became, what, Thursday afternoon? It's like, yeah, come on, bring it half. And before you know it, it's crazy. I watched some of those videos. I mean, it's amazing to see what people did. They were so kind and nice until all of a sudden the doors opened up. And I'm telling you, it was pandemonium. Even though there were thousands of a particular article, people fought it as though there was only 2 left. And in some cases, that's what it was. Before you know it, that began to define what Christmas is. I mean, isn't that how we define Christmas? My wife and I were talking this week. We said, what are we going to buy our families for Christmas? And we thought, oh man, we buy for so many people. And I thought, my heart sinks thinking of those kinds of things until finally we decided to simplify things this Christmas and make it a whole lot different. Not because it's some spiritual piece, but in reality, it's kind of recapturing our belief in what Christmas is really all about. If we look at how society and the world defines Christmas today, it's a far stretch from the miracle on 34th Street. In fact, today, what it becomes is kind of a self-indulgent orgy. I mean, we go out and we spend money, buy things for ourselves and for other people that they really don't want, they really don't need, and somehow we give it to them. And then, what does our world hope above all things? We say to ourselves, I hope they like it. And when they open up the package, we look at them and go, I don't think they liked it. Or even worse is when it appears on Craigslist a few weeks later, when your daughter says, that was a very beautiful table, antique, that you bought me, but it doesn't fit anywhere in my house, I'm going to sell it. And you think, oh, you don't know the love I put into choosing that and making that happen. I mean, that's what it's like. I mean, we're into that. I mean, do you realize that's our symptom? It's all about us buying, and buying for those that we love, and it's buying for those that we care for. And that's how we demonstrate those things. My son sent me a text this week, and he goes, Dad, Christmas is coming. What do you want for Christmas? I thought to myself, I failed again. For you to have to write me and say, what do I want for Christmas? Seriously. So we had to have a little talk. I said, you know what, seriously? My wife writes back and says, good health. That's what we'd like. And I thought to myself, you know, don't be frustrated about what you're going to buy me. Give me a word. Sit with me. Talk to me. Just go do something. Buy whatever it is. I'll love it. Make me something. I'll take whatever it is. Don't get stressed out in what you're getting me and what that's all about. The Miracle on 34th Street, even though it's a secular movie, was a great movie to remind us of a character by the name of Santa Claus, who we sometimes say, well, that's a made-up marketing ploy, but it comes from an original person. And I'll share with you in a moment a little bit about that. But it also opens up another door. And the door is in the door of belief and the door of faith and the door of how we think about things in our world today. In The Miracle of 34th Street, as you've seen the movie, you realize there's this dichotomy of factors. There's this guy by the name of Santa Claus, Kris Kringle, who decides at that particular point to replace the so-called Santa Claus in the 1947 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade because he's a little tippy. And a guy by the name of a lady by the name of Doris Walker, played by Maureen O'Hara, says, I need a Santa Claus. Where will I find one? And he said, well, you can't use that person. She goes, who are you? My name's Kris Kringle. Well, you're like Santa Claus. Would you be our Santa Claus? And then hires him in order to be the Santa Claus for all of Macy's throughout the Christmas season. You ever been to Macy's? Store covers a square block, 10 stories high, the largest department store still in the world. An amazing place. It was a place that was kind of the epicenter of what Christmas was all about. And yet it found itself struggling with this marketing concept of Christmas and Santa Claus and what's real and what isn't. And the world finds itself jettisoning a lot of the things that were the basis of Christmas itself. In fact, at that particular time, there was this thing going on in 1947 which said that sometimes the things about faith and belief and love and hope and all those things were a little old-fashioned. They were illogical. What we needed was logic. We needed to find things that we could put our hands on to test and to trust. That's the reason why Doris Walker, when asked the question, do you believe in Santa Claus, said, of course not. And her poor daughter, who was played by Natalie Woods as a young child, says, Mom, don't you believe in Santa Claus? Oh, honey, I need to explain to you. There are real things and fake things, and this is not real, and you need to understand that you need to move on, and you need to begin to jettison that along with other things called belief. It was in that moment in 1947 when the world found itself questioning a lot of the beliefs. The church, in one of its last heydays, had the opportunity to be caught up in that. As people suddenly said to themselves, this is totally illogical, and especially at Christmas time. Can you imagine the illogical reality of Christmas? I mean, a person who finds himself as a young wife, not married yet, having a child and being born, and the first virgin birth that ever was recorded, an angel that comes to her and tells her about this whole thing. I mean, who believes in angels? Who believes in all these things? And it all got mixed up. And then before you know it, there was a baby born in a stable, and people came to see him, and angels in the sky, and none of this can be proved. Let's throw it out. There's nothing about belief that we need to hold on to anymore. That's what the movie of Miracle on 34th Street was about. A world who said to itself, I don't know if I really believe anymore. That's why the Polar Express came out a few years ago. And they did it because they said to ourselves, we're struggling a little bit in not just believing in Santa Claus. We've lost something called belief. Do you hear me? Look around at the world today. Do you think it's lost that? This thing called belief? I mean, it's kind of a put down, isn't it, in today's world? If you talk about religion, your faith, those kinds of things, people say to you, oh, my poor misguided friend. What we call it today is kind of an amazing thing. We call it left brain, right brain. Don't you love the way it comes off? It's called epistemology. That's what it's called. How do I know what truth is? And we're all after truth. So therefore, we classify people according to left brain, right brain people. Do you all understand that? Left brain, right brain people? Let me see if I can help you with it. There are people who are called right brain people. They're the scientific people. They have facts, they can prove it, and if it's not provable, then guess what? It doesn't count. It's irrelevant in the world. Those are called right brain people. All right? And then there are those who are left brain people. And left brain people are the ones who, they watch Hallmark channels and talk about love and faith and hope and Jesus and all these things. It cannot be proven. And we sometimes look at them and think of them like mental midgets. People who hold on to things that are irrelevant, illogical. That's what Miracle on 34th Street was all about back in 1947. It's where we find ourselves today. We call it that way political parties, the left and the right. But when we look at the political parties, sometimes we find themselves, it's not what one is good and one is bad. The reality is that it's important for us to understand that both exist, and the reality of not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and throwing out those things that we sometimes call illogical because they're important things. That's what happened with Doris Walker. When her lawyer friend, to-be boyfriend, says to her, don't you believe in Santa Claus? She goes, of course not, I don't. And I trained my daughter not to believe in it either, even though secretly her daughter was like, I believe. And when given the opportunity to ask that, Fred, who was a high-paid lawyer in New York, suddenly goes, but I believe too, Doris. I believe those illogical things are the most important things in life. I believe that, like the baby born in the stable and saying I love someone is more than just a chemical response. It's real. It's who we are. It's how we're made. It's part of our life. If I was to ask you today, who are you? Would you call yourself a left-brain person or a right-brain person? At the Farrar Church, I asked them to hold up their hands. It caused a little controversy at that particular point. I saw some husbands sitting next to their wives, and all of a sudden, the husband goes, I'm a right-brainer. And the wife goes, you better be left-brain, because if you don't love me and you don't mean it, I knew that's the way. I thought, oh, man, we got to. So I'm not even going to ask you to put your hand up on that. But in reality, that's the world in which we live today. A world that sometimes finds itself in an illogical state. I love it. Fred, the lawyer, decides to defend Kris Kringle, because of all the things that he did. You know, Kris Kringle was the guy that turned out to be, they made him Santa Claus, you remember? And so they put him on display at Macy's, which is all about buying and selling things, even back in 1947. And all of a sudden, Mr. Macy went crazy because this Santa Claus, this Kris Kringle character, ends up saying to the kids, I'm sorry, we don't have that doll here at Macy's. You'll have to go over to Gimbel's department store and get it. Oh, we got to fire this guy. That's not what we do. We sell them what we have. And this Kris Kringle character said, you know, the important thing about your customer is that you help them. You help them out, even if you send them to your competition. Why? They'd never heard of anything like that before. And then you remember in the movie, Mr. Gimbel and Mr. Macy were shaking hands going, this is the new thing we're going to do. If you can't find it at Macy's, we'll send you to Gimbel's. And the whole world erupted back in 1947 and said, we've never seen anything like this before. Suddenly, you are caring for the customer. We love those kinds of things. That's what the world was caught itself up to. So Fred ends up giving up his big-time job in order to defend in a court case Kris Kringle because he just believes in Kris Kringle. But he believes in lots of other things too. Here's what he says. Look, Doris, someday you're going to find out that your way of facing this realistic world just doesn't work. When you do, don't overlook those lovely intangibles. I love it. Lovely intangibles. You'll discover that they are the only things that are really worthwhile. I wonder if you figured it out yet. It's the intangibles, the things of faith, hope, and love that ultimately matter most to us as human beings. Faith is believing in things that common sense tells you not to. The passage of Scripture read today from Hebrews was this. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Are you a little right brain this year, or does the left brain still have a little bit within you of those lovely intangibles that keeps us from moving into a financial self-directed orgy of gifts that we sometimes buy? Well, let me close with this. In the character was the guy by the name of Kris Kringle, you know, and he was the character that came out as kind of the winner of this whole thing. But you know, there really was a Kris Kringle. It goes back in our faith history, in the Roman Catholic Church especially, back into the era of Malta, in the kind of the Turkey area also. And there was a bishop that was there at that particular time. The bishop at that particular point was referred to as Nicholas. And Nicholas was a young man who grew up in great wealth. His parents were killed. He then went to seminary and then became a priest. It was at that particular time that he surrounded himself with great riches and decided to gift out those riches, specifically not to his family, not to others, but to give out to people who were poor or in need. And as he would discover those people, he would find old socks and he would put gold coins in. Then he would walk by their houses, whatever, secretly, and he would throw these little socks full of coins in, and people would suddenly go, oh, look, we've been blessed. Here we thought we wouldn't have anything, and now look what we have, a gift that's come to us. And no one knew it was Nicholas. In fact, somebody said that probably a few of those got down a chimney somewhere, and so therefore that's how we got it put together. But that's how socks came into the whole process. It wasn't to put in those little gifts that we buy at Target and apples and oranges. Those gifts resembled the story that comes to us, but we've always kind of tweaked things, you know. We don't even talk about the Jesus factor. We don't talk about the socks anymore. We just talk about how we market it in the world in which we find ourselves living. And so it was that this guy by the name of Bishop Nicholas began to fulfill the ministry of Christ. It's the passage from Matthew 25. It's who are those in need? Who are those in prison? How can we help? How can we do? And that became the story of who Nicholas was at that particular point. That's where this character of Santa Claus, that's why in 1947, this miracle of 34th Street with this guy by the name of Kris Kringle began to revive things. And people began to ask that question, who was this person? And Santa Claus wasn't part of it all. Even though some would refer to this person as Santa Claus, the true Christian response was to look at this as a Kris Kringle character, as the Bishop Nicholas. And it became so popular that churches for hundreds of years later were named like the St. Nicholas Roman Catholic Church. And some of them are named that way today, all because of this story, as a continuation of the story of giving to the poor, giving to the needy as part of that. And this name of Kris Kringle then came back in, a contraction, and then of course we've contracted it even more from Kris Kringle into Santa Claus. In the Protestant Reformation, a guy by the name of Martin Luther, he's kind of a corollary of John Wesley, came along and said, we're getting a little bit too much love for this bishop. And of course, wanting to throw out everything that was Roman Catholic, decided to come up with a new concept. And so Martin Luther decided to move from this character called Kris Kringle into one called Christkindl. And Christkindl was a name for the Germans, at least, to understand. It was no longer the bishop person, but now it was the bishop kindle. It was the Christkindl. It was the Christ child. The crystal, the Christ, and the kindle, the child. And he tried to shift the church. We're part of our heritage as the Christian church, saying that what we need to do today is to have an opportunity to begin to put back into place what the Christ child was all about. What we're called to be as part of left brain, at times, Christians, as disciples of Christ. That rather than putting love in a person, we put love in the child, the Christ child. And that we are to fulfill that calling by the acts of kindness and love, part of what Matthew talks about in the 25th chapter. Jesus says to the disciples, you've heard me preach on it, I don't want you to be confused about this. I want you to go about the task doing those things. Those that are hungry, make a difference for them. Those that find themselves poor or weak, or those that find themselves in need, find those people. That is the spirit of Christmas. That is the heart of Christmas. That's what it's all about. That's what the Christ child came to do. That's what we're called to do. The rest of the marketing piece, that's not where it's at, really. Even though we feel like we have to live in that. He says we have to point to that Christ child and the gifts it is. So who becomes the Santa Claus, the Kris Kringle for today? You and I. That's who we're called to be. We're called to go out and to do those acts of kindness into the world, to make a difference in that world, and to live that model of what it is. That's the reality. That's what it's all about. That's what this church is known for. That's what you do in the community. You reach out to people who find themselves in need. That's being the Kris Kringle. That's becoming the Christkindl, the Christ child. And meeting the needs of those who find themselves at the greatest need in their life and in their world. Be Christ to those who are grieving and don't have enough, and to show them what Christ gives to us. This thing called hope and faith and love. What are we doing this year for those that may find themselves in need or the poor? Maybe part of our family. I said to my son this week, I got a deal for you. Whatever you're going to spend on me, spend half. And the other half, write me a little note and tell me how you did something nice with it for somebody who is in need. That'll be a Christmas present for me, and I'll understand. If I don't understand, you remind me that I'm in a self-indulgent orgy in saying, you got to buy me something big and fancy and nice and it's got to cost. Instead, just write me a little note that says, Dad, here's what I bought you, and the other part of your money, I gave it out to something else. And you know what? I'll take that. That'll be the greatest gift that can be given to me. That's the story of a miracle on 34th Street. But it's also the miracle of this table. When Jesus gathered with his disciples, he said to them, this bread is my body, which is broken for you and many for the